Introduction. The vacant throne in the center of nothingness, the hook. The history of humanity is a pathetic play, where slaves take turns begging for permission. The biomass believes that power is a piece of stamped paper, a rusty brass crown, or the ephemeral applause of a cowardly crowd. They live under the ridiculous thermodynamic illusion that authority is granted, inherited, or earned. They believe it is gained through the peaceful consensus of other organisms in a gaseous state. That is the heaviest lie of civil civilization, convincing you that you need the approval of the herd to govern the slaughterhouse. The ordinary man negotiates his strength, dilutes his temperature, and surrenders his vital fire. He does this hoping that the world, in an act of mercy, will grant him a space in which to exist. High metaphysics and the physics of absolute power spit upon the diplomacy of the weak. The three-dimensional universe is not a debating parliament. It is a frigid, deaf, and implacable vacuum. It possesses no moral ruler. There is no hidden judge handing out equitable justice, nor a cosmic tribunal rewarding good behavior. The cosmos is, purely and exclusively, an immense geometric extension of inert space, waiting for the object of greatest mass, density, and gravity to violently position itself in the center. It is a vacuum of raw physics. The laws of orbital mechanics are dictatorial. Light matter has no choice but to orbit and submit to heavy matter. In the exact center of your material reality, there is a vacant throne. It is not forged in gold or silver, because those are soft metals for papier-mâché kings. It is forged in the barometric pressure of nothingness. It is sustained by absolute zero. Throughout your entire life as biomass, you have looked at that seat with biological terror, waiting for someone else to occupy it to dictate how you should live, whom to fear, how much to charge, and when to die. You have operated as an erratic satellite, burning your fuel to orbit others. You have orbited the gravitational pits of corporations, economic systems, or fragile leaders, terrified of assuming your own density. This text is the definitive guillotine for your stage as a negotiator. It is the immediate cessation of your peace treaties with mediocrity. You are now ending the truce with the void. From this millisecond on, you will stop asking permission from the world's inertia. You are about to understand that absolute sovereignty is not a social construct, but an endogenous thermodynamic state. It is the ballistic capacity to compress your osmium core to such an extent that human hierarchies and external threats curve. They will crack and collapse under the crushing weight of your presence. It is not about governing men. It is about subjecting the very acoustics of the environment. Prepare to abandon the morality of organisms that rot. If you are willing to endure the friction of tactical isolation and put on the heavy crown of total causality, if you are ready, move forward. The throne is empty. The scenery awaits its demolition, and the three-dimensional universe waits, in sepulchral silence, for you to pronounce your first decree. You are no longer going to seek power. You are going to exercise the non-negotiable right of conquest. The age of the satellite is over. Chapter 1. The Fallacy of Delegated Power. Thermodynamic begging. The greatest, most successful, and most destructive deception ever operated upon humanity required neither armies nor weapons of mass destruction. It was achieved through a simple inversion in the perception of physics. The biomass was taught, from the first instant their lungs processed oxygen, that power is an external object. They were convinced that authority is a scarce resource, floating in the three-dimensional world, guarded by others, and that the only way to obtain it is by asking permission. This is the fallacy of delegated power, and submitting to it is an act of thermodynamic begging. Observe the ordinary man, the organism in a gaseous state. He spends his decades of biological wear and tear trying to accumulate certificates printed on paper, seeking promotions in corporate hierarchies designed to squeeze out his vital fire, and begging for votes of confidence or likes from a crowd as frightened as he is. They believe if they gather enough approval, they will become powerful. The physics of materials repudiates this stupidity. In the science of thermodynamics, heat flows from hotter bodies to colder ones. When an individual seeks power outside, trying to please their boss, their audience, or their society, they are opening the valves of their own core to radiate their thermal energy outward. They are trying to warm a frigid environment. In doing so, they cool down. They empty themselves. They lose their internal density in a pathetic attempt to buy the world's validation. The power that others grant you is not power. It is a transmission belt. If your authority comes from a title, they can flip the switch. If your power emanates from the applause of the biomass, you are a slave to the acoustics of that mass. You are a beggar king reigning over a house of cards, trembling at the slightest breeze of public disapproval. The sovereign of conscious matter understands that authority is never, under any circumstances, delegated. Authority is generated by pure endogenous compression, and the environment simply surrenders to it by ballistic inertia. You do not wait for the crown, you become the gravity that forces the crown to settle upon your head. Power is not a gift from the tribe, it is a physical property of your own consolidated mass. The acoustic illusion of hierarchies. To dismantle the fallacy of external power, you must dissect the mechanism that sustains human hierarchies. What is a boss? What is a politician? What is an opinion leader? Stripped of their scenery and their custom-cut suits, they are not entities of greater gravitational mass, they are loud chambers. They have learned to emit high frequencies of extortion, fear and promises, and the biomass, which lacks acoustic insulation, receives that noise, becomes terrified, and obeys. Three-dimensional institutions are papier-mâché structures sustained by a collective hallucination. The bank, the state, the corporation, none of them possess real molecular density. They only have the power that you grant them at the exact moment you shrug your shoulders and decide that they weigh more than you. When you walk through the corridors of these hierarchies, you must do so with the X-ray vision of the obsidian surgeon. Observe the individuals occupying positions of delegated power. You will see their eyes blink with hysteria. You will see their chests swell with vain pride, a clear indicator that they are full of gas, not metal. They are terrified of losing their chairs because they know they are nothing without the desk. Their power is a borrowed suit that is too large for them. The sovereign does not compete to climb the papier-mâché ladder. An osmium core does not climb rungs. Its mere presence at the base of the ladder makes the entire structure creak, destabilize, and collapse from material stress. You do not want the job. You want to establish a new law of gravity in the room that makes the very existence of the hierarchy irrelevant. You are the structural anomaly that the system cannot categorize. While they argue over titles and seating charts, you occupy the space with a density that renders their social labels mathematically void. Castration by consensus, the democratic poison. The most lethal corollary of the fallacy of delegated power is the cult of consensus. The biomass has been indoctrinated to believe that truth and authority reside in the majority. They believe that if 100 frightened sheep agree on a direction, that direction must be the correct one. In the mechanics of absolute sovereignty, seeking consensus is an act of thermodynamic castration. When you, who possess the potential for infinite density, stop your machinery to ask your environment if they agree with your movement, you are committing ballistic sabotage. You are fragmenting your laser beam. You are scattering your attention into dozens of weak flashlights. The crowd does not have the mathematical capacity to process the weight of an absolute mandate. The crowd only processes averages, and the average of human biomass is fearful mediocrity. If you submit your plans to a vote, they will slow you. They will act as an aerodynamic parachute. They will demand that you reduce your speed, soften your angles, and become less radical or less arrogant, so they are not intimidated by the pressure of your displacement. They will ask you to dilute yourself so they can breathe. The monarch seeks no allies. He generates satellites. He does not ask for opinions. He emits laws of physics. The universe was not created by consensus. A black hole does not call an assembly of space rocks to decide if it should devour a star. It simply exerts its crushing geometric superiority, and the star is assimilated. If you wish to exercise absolute power, you must amputate the mammalian urge to be liked by the biomass. Your goal is not to be loved or understood. Understanding is a consolation prize for those who lack the strength to be obeyed. Your goal is to become an unnegotiable object in a world of ghosts. Endogenous gravity, the end of delegation. How then is this fallacy empirically destroyed in your daily life? How do you transition from the state of a negotiating slave to the state of an absolute legislator? You must apply the principle of endogenous gravity. This means that the origin and fuel of your power must reside within your own consciousness. It must be completely disconnected from external supplies. First, you must execute a ballistic expropriation of your own attention. Stop looking up. Stop looking at those who call themselves your superiors. When you enter a commercial negotiation or a legal conflict, your mental stance must be anchored. It must be anchored in glacial contempt. You do not enter asking for a fair deal. You enter to dictate the terms of the surrender of the other's matter. If the other side of the table uses their delegated power, threatening you with their capital or status, your response must be absolute zero. You do not flinch. You do not defend yourself, because defending yourself would imply recognizing that their weapon has an edge. You let their papier-mâché threat crash against your heavy silence. By not receiving the friction of fear they expected, their power evaporates instantly. They discover that their titles and money cannot buy the dilation of your pupils or alter the sub-bass rhythm of your breathing. And in the terrifying vacuum of your immobility, the only gravity left operating in the room is yours. You have reclaimed the mandate from the external world and fused it into your core. Ballistic expropriation of command. Absolute power is taken through the geometric occupation of space. Imagine a room where the biomass is chaotically discussing who should lead, who is to blame for the crisis, and what direction to take. Everyone speaks by emitting high frequencies. Everyone begs for the attention of the rest. The sovereign does not enter the room shouting louder to be heard. Entering the volume competition is submitting to the rule of the biomass. The sovereign enters, locates the seat of greatest tactical advantage, sits in it with the weight of a geological mass, and simply applies charged immobility. He does not interrupt. He does not offer an opinion. He only radiates a dense and suffocating silence that begins to consume the oxygen of the room. Slowly, the voices will die down. The gaseous chaos of the biomass cannot sustain itself in the presence of a hyperdense core. One by one, they will turn. Frightened individuals will turn their faces toward you, inexorably drawn by the barometric pressure you are generating. Their delegated power and titles will crumble under the weight of your inertia. They will look at you expecting an order, because weak matter desperately needs strong matter to dictate its form. You have not asked for power. You have not been voted in. You have not delegated your strength to a credential. You have simply forced classical physics to do its job. The fallacy of delegated power has been destroyed. Authority is a property of compressed matter. You are starting the final compression. The architecture of the absolute mandate. The shift from being a spectator to becoming the center of gravity requires the total destruction of social hope. As long as you hope for a promotion, a raise, or a compliment, you are still plugged into the world's battery. You are a component, not an operator. To unplug is to reclaim your potential energy. The monarch understands that influence is merely a secondary effect of density. You do not need to work on your influence. You work on your mass. When you become sufficiently heavy, influence happens automatically as others are sucked into your orbital path. This is the secret of effortless command. Most people struggle to lead because they are trying to convince the biomass. Persuasion is the tool of the weak. It is the friction of words trying to spark a fire in damp wood. The sovereign does not persuade. He creates a gravitational reality that makes any other choice impossible. He changes the map. Consider the nature of a command. A weak man issues an order and then waits to see if it is followed, exposing his uncertainty. The sovereign issues a decree and then returns to the silence, treating the outcome as a mathematical certainty. He does not check the result. His density ensures the result. This is the mandate of the void. By offering no surface for debate, you force the environment to collapse into the form you have prescribed. The biomass will interpret this as charisma or leadership, but you know it is simply the removal of all structural resistance within your own anechoic chamber, the sovereignty of the inexpressible. In the theater of delegated power, language is used to negotiate, beg, and explain. In the kingdom of endogenous gravity, language is used as a ballistic projectile or not used at all. The more you explain your power, the more you dilute it. Explanation is a form of thermal leakage. It is an apology for your mass. The thermal ghost walks among the hierarchies without explaining his presence. He occupies the chair, takes the profit, and issues the decree without seeking the why. When you stop providing the why, you starve the biomass of its ability to argue. You leave them clutching at shadows while you hold the substance. You must become comfortable with the inexplicable presence. When they ask by what authority you act, your answer is the silence of the osmium core. You act by the authority of your own existence. This is the only authority that cannot be revoked, because it was never granted by an external hand. As you expand your field of influence, you will encounter those who try to redelegate you. They will offer you titles, positions, and fake crowns to bring you back into their system of control. They want to turn your black hole into a predictable star. You must devour the offer and remain unmapped. Take the resources, occupy the territory, and use their infrastructure, but never accept the leash of their labels. You are not a manager, an executive, or a leader. You are a force of nature wearing a human suit for tactical convenience. You are the operator of the system, not a part of its inventory. The final collapse of the social mirror. The ultimate test of your endogenous gravity is the total destruction of the social mirror. The biomass lives for the reflection they see in the eyes of others. They are happy when the mirror smiles. They are devastated when it frowns. They are entirely dependent on the optical feedback of the crowd. The sovereign has shattered the mirror. You do not look at others to see who you are. You look at others to see where the friction is. When you no longer need the world to tell you that you are powerful, you are finally free to use that power with surgical and devastating precision. You are the only judge. This independence creates a gravity well that is irresistible. People are drawn to the one who does not need them. The biomass will flock to you, offering their loyalty and their resources, simply because you are the only solid thing in a world of ghosts. You become the anchor for their drifting lives. But you must be careful. Do not let their need become your burden. You are not a savior, you are a monarch. Use their mass to increase your own, but never allow their gaseous nature to contaminate your vacuum. You remain isolated, dense, and absolute, even as the world begins to revolve around you. The chapter of delegation is closed. You have seen through the thin veil of human hierarchies. You have realized that the throne has always been yours to take, provided you were heavy enough to sit on it. Now, move into the world not as a seeker of permission, but as the architect of a new gravitational order. Chapter 2. The Forging of the Gravitational Well. The humiliation of kinetic pursuit. Observe the behavior of the biomass in its natural state, and you will discover the most pathetic confession of its structural weakness. They live in a state of perpetual pursuit. Gaseous man runs after money, runs after affection, runs after business opportunities, and chases the validation of his superiors. They invest industrial quantities of caloric energy and mechanical friction, trying to reach objects, people, and situations that constantly move away from them. In heavy physics, pursuit is not a demonstration of ambition. It is a thermodynamic humiliation. The law of universal gravitation is frigid and non-negotiable. It dictates the following. The object of lesser mass is always forced to move toward the object of greater mass. When you pursue a contract, you are mathematically confessing that the contract weighs more than you. When you pursue a person for love or respect, you grant them absolute gravitational superiority. Kinetic pursuit is the act of voluntarily submitting to the orbit of another body. You are the satellite, begging the planet not to let you fall into the void. The sovereign, seated in the osmium core of conscious matter, never pursues. Hunting is for biological animals who fear dying of hunger. The monarch does not hunt. The monarch forges a gravitational well so dense, monstrous, and suffocating that the entire ecosystem, capital, allies, circumstances, and enemies, loses its own inertia and is violently dragged toward the center of his will. You do not reach power by moving toward it. You force it to collapse. The mathematical anatomy of fatal attraction. To understand how this endogenous gravity is forged, you must abandon the ridiculous and esoteric law of attraction that consumer spirituality sells to the weak. The biomass believes that if they think positive or vibrate high, the universe will send them gifts. That is the fantasy of a gas dreaming of being metal. True attraction is not a desire. It is a geometric deformation of space. Imagine the three-dimensional universe as an immense sheet of tensioned steel. If you place a glass marble on that sheet, the marble will stay still or be pushed by the wind of circumstances. That is the ordinary man. But if you place a 500-ton lead sphere in the center of that sheet, the steel itself will curve under the weight, creating a deep funnel. Any object passing near that funnel, regardless of whether it wants to or not, will lose its straight trajectory and roll toward the bottom, crashing against the lead sphere. That deformation of the spatial fabric is the gravitational well, and it is forged through a single mechanic, the extreme densification of a tension through the retention of vital heat. The biomass has no mass because it bleeds its energy all day. They react to everything. They are indignant at the news. They respond frantically to the demands of their phones, argue with idiots, explain their decisions, and justify their mistakes. Each reaction is a thermal leak. It is an exhalation of gas that makes them lighter, more predictable, and easier to manipulate. By bleeding their gravity, they fail to curve reality. Compressing the core, the art of not bleeding. The forging of your gravitational well begins in the millisecond. You apply a thermodynamic tourniquet to all your leaks. You become a closed system. When the outside world attempts to provoke you into emitting a reaction, you apply charged immobility. A client threatens to cancel $1 million contract. The biomass would panic, plead, or offer discounts, bleeding its mass. The sovereign receives the threat, breathes in sub-bass frequency, and emits no acoustic response. He holds the obsidian gaze, letting the panic slide off his geometric surface. This refusal to react generates compression. By not expelling heat outward, energy accumulates inside you, crushing the atoms of your consciousness against each other until creating a hyperdense singularity. You become heavy, and the three-dimensional world, which is extremely sensitive to changes in barometric pressure, detects this new density. The person who threatened to leave suddenly finds himself on the edge of a frigid abyss. He expected you to run toward him, pursuit, but by staying still and heavy, the steel sheet under his feet curves. Suddenly, he feels the biological terror of falling toward you. He is the one who breaks the silence. The collapse of finances and loyalties toward your center. The orbital physics of domination does not distinguish between people, money, or circumstances. Fluid mechanics apply to the entire cinderboard. Financial capital, for example, is pure kinetic energy flowing through the pipes of the human ecosystem. It flows naturally toward least resistance and greatest gravity. If you operate from desperation, low density, money moves away from you like water flees a convex surface. If you operate from the gravitational well of sovereignty, high concave density, money accumulates at your center, forced by the barometric pressure of your refusal to pursue it. In business and alliances, people swear loyalty not to good people, but to immovable structures. Ordinary man is so unstable and gaseous that living by his side is like trying to build a house in a hurricane. When you forge your osmium core, you become the only piece of firm, solid ground for miles. High-value individuals, strategic resources, and lethal allies will collapse toward your orbit not because they like you, but because the physics of survival dictates they must anchor to the heaviest object in the system to avoid being flung into the void. You become their thermodynamic anchor, the tactic of the black hole in the room. To apply this heavy metaphysics in day-to-day logistical combat, you must operate with the tactic of the black hole. Imagine entering a boardroom, a high-stakes negotiation, or a territorial conflict. The biomass enters the room trying to fill the space with fast words and fake power poses. They are trying to push the air. They are trying to impose their form. The sovereign enters the room and does not try to push anything. The sovereign sits and sucks the air out. You adopt a posture of absolute geometric relaxation, but your internal core operates at maximum compression. You do not offer unnecessary information. You do not nod to validate whoever is speaking. You do not laugh if the friction does not warrant it. You become an energy sink. The room, accustomed to mutual friction, suddenly detects a massive pressure leak toward your chair. The words of others are absorbed by your anechoic silence and return no echo. This unleashes the biological terror of the herd. Unable to read your temperature or measure your limits, adversaries begin to lose their molecular cohesion. They talk too much, trying to fill the well. They reveal their weaknesses. The kidnapping of enemy inertia. The perfection of this gravitational forge is manifested when your own enemies are forced to work for you without realizing it. When an adversary decides to attack you frontally, he throws all his thermal mass in your direction. If you oppose resistance, if you crash against him, you generate friction. But if you keep the gravitational well open, the attack does not crash, it simply falls in. The inertia of their hatred, envy, or aggression is captured by your gravity and forced to orbit your core. You use the energy of their attacks to increase your own barometric pressure. While the enemy exhausts himself burning fuel to destroy you, your osmium core assimilates that kinetic energy, cools it in the vacuum chamber, and uses it to further densify your position on the board. You watch them spin around you, spitting fire, while you grow in mass at their expense. You have ceased to be an inhabitant of the universe. You have forged the gravitational well. And now everything that possesses a mass inferior to yours is irrevocably condemned to fall. The orbit is yours. The center is yours. The reality is yours. The sovereignty of the immovable center. Forging the well requires the total abandonment of the reactionary mind. The biomass is a slave to the stimulus-response loop. They are like billiard balls, moving only when struck by the cue of external events. To escape this, you must realize that every time you react, you are seeding your center. True density is achieved when the gap between the stimulus and your response becomes an infinite void. In that void, the external event loses its momentum. It is not about being stoic or calm in a psychological sense. It is about being physically too heavy for the event to move you. Consider the nature of a black hole. It is not aggressive. It does not actively hunt stars. It simply exists with such absolute density that the star has no choice but to be unmade by its presence. This is the ultimate form of non-action. Your power is a result of what you are, not what you do. When you attain this state, you will notice a shift in the social fabric. People will begin to choose their words carefully around you. They will feel a weight in the air that wasn't there before. This is the beginning of their orbital decay. They are testing the boundaries of your gravity and finding none. The extraction of external value. As your well deepens, you become a collector of the world's discarded momentum. When others fail, when they panic, when they retreat, they leave behind orphaned energy. This energy, be it market share, social influence, or strategic assets, naturally slides toward the nearest stable mass. You do not need to take these things. You simply provide the only coordinate where they can rest. The world is full of chaotic, high-velocity energy looking for a place to stop. By being the absolute point of stillness, you become the destination for everything the world can no longer hold. This is how empires are built in silence. While others are exhausted by the friction of acquisition, you expand through the physics of accumulation. You are the structural necessity of the system. You are the gravity that holds the fragmented pieces of reality together in your own image. The final gravity of the decree. Once the poso is fully formed, your voice takes on the quality of a command even when you speak softly. Your words are no longer opinions or suggestions. They are descriptions of the new geometry you have created. When you speak from the center of a gravitational well, the listener's mind is already falling. They cannot resist your logic because your logic is backed by the overwhelming weight of your presence. To disagree with you feels like trying to argue with the ground beneath their feet. You have moved beyond the need for persuasion because you have changed the very topography of the conversation. This is the end of the stage of becoming and the start of being. You no longer seek to be heavy. You are heavy. You no longer try to attract. You are attraction. The world is no longer a place you navigate. It is a medium that navigates around you, bending to the curve of your will. Chapter 3. The Thermodynamics of Conquest, the Heat of Expansion. The Imperative of Expansive Inertia. There is a lethal calculation error in the philosophy of the weak who attempt to isolate themselves from the world. They believe that sovereignty is a static state. The ordinary man, when he achieves a minimum of control over his life, builds a wall around himself, sits behind it, and adopts a defensive posture. He calls this peace. Heavy physics calls this a self-imposed siege. In classical mechanics and astrophysics, no hyperdense mass is passive toward its environment. If you possess the density of the osmium core, it is geometrically impossible for your influence to end at the boundary of your skin. Gravity has no rigid limits. It radiates toward infinity. It loses strength with distance, but never truly reaches zero. Therefore, the sovereign does not defend, the sovereign expands. Absolute power demands three-dimensional territory. You cannot be the legislator of reality if your law only applies to the square meter where you stand. Conscious matter enters the phase of quantum imperialism. This conquest is not executed with the vulgarity of human armies. There are no shouts, no swords, and no unnecessary friction. The sovereign's conquest is executed through the most non-negotiable law of the material universe, the thermodynamics of heat transfer. You do not ask for ground. You radiate it into submission. Colonization through thermal radiation. Human biomass confuses conflict with conquest. When the gaseous mass wants to dominate another, it uses kinetic energy. They argue, they assault, they try to convince or manipulate through frontal shock. They strike their bodies and voices against the other, hoping the adversary's structure breaks first. The monarch repudiates kinetic energy because frontal shock requires recognizing that the adversary has a surface worthy of being hit. You do not strike the territory, you radiate it. In thermodynamics, when two bodies of different temperature and density come into contact, the body with greater energy will transfer its state. The cold and fragile body has no option to reject the heat of the massive object. The laws of physics force it to absorb that energy until both reach equilibrium. But when your density is virtually infinite compared to the lightness of the environment, equilibrium is not a middle point. Equilibrium is total assimilation. When you enter a new territory, a hostile corporate board, a stalled negotiation, or a foreign social ecosystem, you do not arrive to compete for leadership. You enter, occupy your geometric space, and begin to radiate your sub-base frequency of charged immobility. You are a nuclear reactor in absolute silence. Hijacking the ambient temperature. Analyze the behavior of a room full of organisms in a gaseous state. The environment is usually dominated by anxiety, haste, ego, and the need to please. That is the local temperature. The biomass entering that room feels the pressure of the environment and instinctively adjusts its thermostat to fit in. They laugh at the same nervous jokes, accelerate their breathing, and submit to the group's frequency. The thermodynamics of conquest demands the immediate hijacking of that ambient temperature. You cross the threshold and anchor your mass. If the room is in kinetic hysteria, you establish absolute zero. If they ask you a quick question expecting a reactive response, you let the question hang in the air for 3 or 4 seconds of dense, heavy, and suffocating silence. You look into the interlocutor's eyes without blinking, and then you respond with ballistic slowness, using a tone that seeks no approval. In that precise instant, you have altered the barometric pressure of the entire room. The biomass will feel the thermal shock. Their gaseous and fast inertia will crash against the immovable wall of your deliberate slowness. Because you possess infinitely greater density, they cannot drag you into their hysteria. They will be the ones who must reduce their revolutions, lower their tone, and slow their heart rate to interact with you. Without having issued a single explicit order, without having debated a single argument, you have just subjected the biology of all present to your own heart rate. You have consumed the territory, the melting of enemy geometry. What happens when a direct adversary, someone who believes they own their territory, tries to resist your thermal expansion? The enemy has a determined shape. They have demands, limits they swear not to cross, and an ego to protect. That is their geometry. They try to maintain that shape at all costs, but wax cannot maintain its shape when exposed to the thermal radiation of molten steel. By applying the implacable radiation of your geometric indifference, the adversary's structure begins to heat up and lose molecular cohesion. They become desperate. They demand that you get upset, angry, or negotiate. The sovereign applies sustained tactical asphyxiation. You do not discuss their demands. You ignore them with mathematical coldness. You look at their threats as if reading an old newspaper. By denying the oxygen of validation to their hostility and maintaining constant pressure, the enemy's geometry melts. You will observe how their non-negotiable limits soften. You will see how their arrogant tone liquefies, turning into frustration and then submission. Their form disintegrates under the heat of your radiation, and once they have become liquid, they have no choice but to pour themselves into your mold. The omnipresence of the mandate, occupying the void. Territorial conquest does not end when the enemy surrenders or the room falls silent. The thermodynamics of empire demand occupying every cubic centimeter of the generated vacuum. The biomass, when achieving a small victory, retreats to celebrate, leaving a power vacuum quickly filled by another parasitic force. The monarch never retreats. When you radiate your temperature and melt the environment's will, you advance your mass to occupy that new physical and psychological space. From that moment on, your way of observing, your standards, and your acoustic silence become the new normality of the ecosystem. You have imposed a new thermodynamic constitution. Anyone who wants to survive in that territory must now do so by orbiting your osmium core. If they try to return to their old gaseous ways, the barometric pressure shock within your territory will quickly suffocate them and expel them. You do not control people through micromanagement. That is exhausting and belongs to weak managers. You control the territory by dictating the ecosystem's radiation level. You change the laws of gravity in that space. Now, any object falling within your empire obeys your mathematical constants. The metabolism of victory, the true demonstration that you have mastered the thermodynamics of conquest, is your metabolism in the face of success. When the sovereign consumes foreign territory, when the corporation yields, when money flows toward his well and adversaries kneel, the sovereign does not smile with arrogance. He does not celebrate like a private who just survived a skirmish. Arrogance and euphoria are thermal leaks. They are proof that you did not expect to win and that triumph has unbalanced you. For the monarch, consuming territory is as natural and inescapable as breathing. Gravity does not celebrate. You assimilate victory with a metabolism of iron. The new territory, the new capital, or the new power melts into your core and increases your mass, making you even denser, more lethal, and more silent. The environment watches this lack of celebration with panic. Understanding you have not been sated, the thermodynamic vacuum you possess within has no bottom. You have radiated your heat, melted their resistance, and kept the ground. Now that the entire ecosystem has been forced to orbit under your physical laws, it is the moment to learn to issue orders in a ballistic manner. The sovereignty of cold expansion. To expand is to survive. In the three-dimensional render of the human market, there is no such thing as a stable position. You are either growing in mass and absorbing the surrounding territory, or you are being eroded by the entropy of the biomass. The sovereign understands that stagnation is the first symptom of decay. Expansion is not about greed. It is about the structural necessity of the core to exert its true nature. When you identify a new area of influence, be it a new market, a social circle, or a higher tier of power, you do not approach it as an intruder. You approach it as a natural phenomenon that is reclaiming its space. You begin the deep scan of the new territory's temperature. You identify the pockets of gaseous resistance and the hollow structures of the current hierarchies. You do not attack them. You simply position your mass adjacent to them. The proximity of your osmium core begins the process of structural fatigue in the environment. The current owners of the territory will feel an inexplicable weight. They will start making mistakes. They will overreact to your presence because they cannot categorize your silence. This is the pre-impact heating. By simply being there, heavy and unmoving, you are already melting the foundations of their control. The assimilation of local inertia. Every territory has its own momentum, a set of rules, habits, and ways things are done. The weak man tries to adapt to this inertia. The sovereign captures it. Like a massive planet capturing a passing asteroid, you take the local momentum and bend it until it serves your central purpose. You do not dismantle the existing systems immediately. You allow them to keep spinning, but you change their axis. You become the hidden center of the machine. The employees, the assets, and the information begin to flow toward you because you are the only point of zero resistance and absolute stability. This is silent colonization. By the time the old guard realizes they have lost control, the entire infrastructure has already been recalibrated to your frequency. You haven't fired a single shot, yet you own every brick and every mind. You have replaced their chaotic heat with your ordered glacial expansion. The crown of total responsibility. Expansion brings more mass, and more mass brings a higher gravitational debt. The sovereign does not shy away from this. To own the territory is to be the cause of everything within it. You are the architect of the new order, and any failure in the system is a reflection of a leak in your own core. This is the price of the absolute mandate. You do not blame the market, the economy, or unreliable people. Those are gaseous excuses. If the territory is yours, then you are the law of physics governing it. If a component fails, you replace it or crush it, but you never complain. Complaints are for the light. Your expansion continues until it meets a density equal to your own. In the rare event that two osmium cores intersect, there is no war. There is a binary synchronization. You recognize the same math, the same silence, and the same absolute zero. Everything else is just fuel for your growing sun. You have moved beyond the need for growth as a human concept. You are now experiencing massive accumulation. Every victory makes you heavier. Every territory makes you more silent. You are becoming the fixed point around which the entire sector of your reality must revolve. Chapter 4. The Acoustics of the Imperial Decree. The vulgarity of debate and the assassination of consensus. There is an acoustic disease infecting the totality of the biomass, the addiction to dialogue. The masses have been programmed by the architects of mediocrity to believe that debate is the pinnacle of civilization. They believe that exposing arguments, exchanging opinions, and seeking middle ground is the behavior of a superior intellect. Heavy physics of absolute sovereignty observes debate with the same disgust a surgeon feels for an infected wound. Debating is an act of horizontal friction. For a debate to exist, you must implicitly accept a lethal thermodynamic premise. You must accept that the other individual's mass is equal to your own. You lower your core. You lower your osmium core to the gaseous density of your interlocutor, placing your truth on a scale next to theirs, begging for the invisible judge of consensus to rule in your favor. Debate is a competition of beggars trying to see who screams louder. The monarch does not debate. He does not exchange kinetic energy with the scenery. When the sovereign opens his mouth, he does not do so to seek validation or to convince idiots of their idiocy. Talking to convince is bleeding vital heat. The sovereign speaks purely to emit a ballistic decree. He speaks to physically alter the barometric pressure of the room. You must unlearn the language of slaves. High frequencies versus sub-bass frequencies, material penetration. Science teaches us that not all waves travel the same way. High frequencies, shrieks, screams of panic, pleas, and nervous justifications have very short wavelengths. They dissipate quickly and bounce off solid surfaces. If you scream at a concrete wall with a high-pitched voice, the sound bounces back at you. This is how the biomass sounds. Their words bounce because they lack density. When they ask for something, they do so with a rising inflection at the end of the sentence, leaving the phrase suspended in the air, begging the other to pick it up. Sub-bass frequencies operate under a completely different set of physics. Low-frequency waves have massive lengths. They do not bounce off walls, they pass through them. They go through concrete, steel, and water. You cannot stop a sub-bass sound with ordinary panels. The bass vibrates the floor, penetrates the skeleton, and alters the listener's heart rate without asking permission. The Imperial decree is a sub-bass frequency. It is not about forcing your voice to sound artificially hoarse. That is cheap theater. It is about anchoring your voice in the gravity of your core. When you speak from charged immobility, your ribcage acts as a lead resonator. The order hits the floor before it advances. The ballistic anatomy of the decree, the weight of brevity. For a word to act as a ballistic detonation, it must be stripped of all camouflage and adornment. The biomass wraps its intentions in clouds of acoustic cotton. They use prefixes of weakness. I think that maybe we should. I would like it if. They inject unnecessary adjectives to soften the blow. They are terrified of offending the environment. By doing this, they turn their projectile into a harmless snowball. The anatomy of the Imperial decree is ruthlessly brief. It consists of noun, verb, and direction. It is a depleted uranium projectile, small, dark, and capable of piercing a tank's armor. The sovereign does not say, "I think it would be a good idea if you could send me that report before Friday, please, because I need it for the meeting." The sovereign emits the sub-bass frequency, fixes the obsidian gaze, and decrees, "That report will be in my hands Friday morning." Full stop. There is no cotton. There is no begging. The verb is not in the conditional would be, could you. It is anchored in the geometric certainty of the non-negotiable future, will be, shall be done, proceed. Brevity is the mass multiplier. The fewer words you use, the more each one weighs. The assassination of justification. The most destructive tactical error a man commits when trying to exercise power is justifying his orders. The moment you issue an order and immediately add a because, you have just murdered your own sovereignty. Justification is a mathematical confession of inferiority. You are handing over the power. By giving a reason, you are placing your decree in the defendant's dock and naming your interlocutor as the judge. You are telling them, "I give you this order, but I hand you the justification so that you can evaluate whether my order is valid or not." The osmium core never sits in the defendant's dock. The monarch is the law, and the law does not answer to ashes. When you emit the imperial decree, the sentence ends abruptly. If the gaseous environment looks at you expecting a justification, you give them the absolute void of your anechoic chamber. You do not fill the silence, you do not get nervous. You maintain charged immobility and let the weight of the unjustified order crush their expectations. By depriving the biomass of a justification, you take away their rebound surface. They cannot argue against your order because you have given them no argument to refute. You have only delivered a massive block of steel. The anvil of post-decree silence. The acoustics of absolute power reside not only in the emission of the sound wave, but in the thermodynamic vacuum established immediately afterward. The biomass fears silence. When they speak, they are frightened by their own sound and quickly keep talking to cover the echo, diluting any impact they had. The sovereign uses post-decree silence as a secondary anvil. Once the ballistic projectile has left your lips, your mouth becomes a vacuum-sealed vault. You close the data transmission. You lean back millimetrically into your axis of gravity, and you observe. That deliberate silence is unbearable for them. The shockwave of your decree has just hit their nervous system, and the following silence acts as a gravitational field that sucks them in. In that acoustic abyss, the adversary will begin to suffocate. They will feel the imperious need to fill the void, to respond, to move, to obey. They will struggle. You will see their reptilian brains fight against the barometric pressure. They will try to maintain eye contact, but the radiation from your obsidian pupils will force them to look down. In that millisecond, where their chin descends, and they nod to break the silence, sovereignty has been consummated. Tactical negation. Annihilating with a monosyllable. The reverse of the imperial decree is absolute negation, the capacity to destroy enemy inertia with a single syllable. Society is designed to extort you through compromise. They corner you with complex questions and moral obligations, hoping you get entangled in their webs of friction. They want why. They want you to explain why you cannot do something, to use your explanations against you. The sovereign deploys the wall of monosyllabic negation. When the world's machinery tries to impose a burden you do not desire, you do not look for excuses. You do not invent previous commitments or apologize. You listen to the proposal, allow the high wave of their request to die in your anechoic chamber, and emit the heaviest sub-bass frequency of human language. No. And then you apply the anvil of silence. That orphaned no, devoid of adjectives and apologies, is a retaining wall of infinite density. The biomass will crash into it at full speed and break their nose. They will look at you bewildered, waiting for the sentence to continue. No. Why? They will ask desperately. The monarch, from the altitude of his throne, does not add a single syllable. The negative requires no validation. The resonance of the absolute will. The transition from a being that vibrates in the environment to a being that defines the environment requires a total overhaul of your internal hardware. You are no longer communicating, you are calibrating. Every time you speak, you are setting the frequency of the reality around you. The biomass uses language as a tool for connection and survival. You use it as a tool for structural reordering. When you enter a territory, your first decrees are stress tests. You issue a minor, unjustified command to measure the resistance of the local materials. You observe where the friction occurs. If the environment resists, you do not increase the volume, you increase the density. You repeat the decree with a lower frequency and a longer silence. You wait for the gaseous resistance to dissipate under the weight of your unmoving stance. You are the anvil that does not move regardless of the hammer's strength. Soon the environment will learn that your words are not proposals, but physical laws. They will stop trying to negotiate because they will realize there is no surface to negotiate with. You have become a topographic fact. You are the mountain that does not explain its height. You simply occupy the sky. The sovereignty of the unspoken word. There is a supreme level of the imperial decree where no sound is necessary. This is the ocular mandate. When your core is sufficiently dense, a mere shift in your gaze or a subtle change in your posture acts as a sub-bass frequency. You signal the direction of the reality you want and the biomass follows. This happens because you have trained the environment to expect the decree. They are already in a state of orbital decay toward your center. They are watching you for cues on how to behave, how to feel, and what to do. At this point, your silence is more communicative than their loudest proclamations. You must guard this silence with a lethal obsession. Do not let the social itch force you into small talk. Every time you speak about trivialities, you are leaking mass. You are proving that you are like them. A monarch who discusses the weather is a monarch who invites the crowd to sit on his throne. Maintain the distance. Maintain the vacuum. When you do choose to speak, let it be an event. Let the room go cold. Let the listeners hold their breath, knowing that what is about to come out of your mouth is not an opinion, but a transformation of their world. Your word is the limit of their horizon, of their. The decree is a tool of deconstruction. The imperial decree is not only used to build your empire, but to deconstruct the illusions of others. When someone presents a complex, important project designed to inflate their ego, you can deconstruct it with a single, low-frequency question. So? By refusing to acknowledge the importance they have manufactured, you drain the heat from their system. You force them to face the hollow nature of their gaseous constructs. You are the forensic surgeon of reality, cutting through the fat of social pretense to find the bone of the matter. In this way, you become the only source of truth in the ecosystem, not because you possess moral superiority, but because you are the only one not participating in the collective hallucination. You are the one who calls the void by its name. And the void, recognizing its master, submits to your command. The era of the diplomat is dead. The era of the orator is dead. You have entered the era of the legislator. Your voice is the vibration of the osmium core, and the world is the clay waiting to be shaped by your sub-bass decrees. Silence is your armor. The decree is your scepter. Chapter 5. The Monopoly of Friction. The Era of Symmetrical Defense and the Honor Trap. Human biomass lives subjected to the dictatorship of stimulus. Lacking a dense core to stabilize its orbit, gaseous man is a slave to external forces. If someone insults him, his biology explodes in anger and returns the insult. If a competitor attacks, he abandons his plans to defend his territory. Civilization has disguised this Pavlovian, predictable, and pathetic reaction under the romantic concept of honor. In the thermodynamics of absolute power, reactive honor is the suicide of the weak. When an adversary attacks you via verbal provocation or logistical aggression, they are trying to strike a match. They are offering you friction. They expect you to crash against them so the friction generates a spark, ignites the dry wood of your ego, and unleashes a fire. If you respond to the attack in that precise moment and place, you have committed a catastrophic strategic error. You have ceded control of the coordinates. He chose the day, the hour, and the battlefield. By reacting, you simply obeyed his agenda. You have abandoned your throne to go down into the mud, to fight under the terms of an inferior organism. You have ceased to be the sovereign to become a simple reactive pawn. You have surrendered your mass to his whim. Friction as thermodynamic currency. To exercise quantum imperialism, you must understand that conflict is not an accident. Conflict is a transfer of energy. Friction is the most expensive currency in the material universe. Every time you enter combat, you burn fuel, expose your geometry, and alter your barometric pressure. It is a costly leak. Therefore, the monarch does not give his friction to just anyone who barks at him in the street. The monarch establishes an absolute monopoly over combustion. To have a monopoly on friction means that in your three-dimensional universe, sparks only jump when you authorize them. Fire only burns when you decide. If the environment tries to force you to fight, you deny the oxygen to the conflict. If the enemy wants war today, you decree the icy peace of absolute zero, not out of cowardice, but out of pure logistical tyranny. You decide when energy is spent. By monopolizing friction, you strip adversaries of initiative. They become impotent. They can scream, threaten, and hit the air, but they cannot force your osmium core to heat up. An enemy who cannot alter your temperature is an enemy who has already lost the war before firing the first bullet. You are the master of the ignition switch and the regulator of the flame. Tactical blindness, suffocating the attack in the void. The main tool to sustain this monopoly is tactical blindness. When the projectile of enemy aggression is fired toward your coordinates, your mammalian instinct will demand you raise a concrete shield. To raise a shield is to oppose resistance, and resistance generates the friction the adversary needs. The sovereign does not raise shields. The sovereign disintegrates his own surface and becomes a vacuum chamber. Applying tactical blindness means violently withdrawing your attention from the aggression. You look at the adversary's attack with the same indifference a geologist looks at an irrelevant stone. You do not take offense. You do not grant him the dignity of your anger. By denying him your gaze, you are withdrawing the gravitational mass from the event. Imagine a member of the biomass launching a fierce attack, seeking to destroy you. Instead of finding resistance, his blow passes through the air. He finds nothing. You do not return the aggression. You do not justify yourself. You simply ignore him with a contempt so dense, so heavy, and so absolute that the adversary experiences immediate vertigo. His attack needed oxygen, your reaction, to survive. By giving him tactical blindness, he suffocates. The choice of the anvil, the asymmetric battlefield. Denying initial friction does not mean the sovereign forgives. Forgiveness is a moral concept for martyrs. The osmium core does not forgive or forget. It simply files the telemetry and calculates the exact moment for ballistic execution. You suffocated the attack because its terms did not suit you. Now the enemy believes you have been passive. He relaxes. He lowers his guard, mistaking your charged immobility for weakness. That is the millisecond in which the sovereign takes control of the board. You choose the anvil. You choose the new coordinates, the pressure, and the battlefield. You do not attack where the enemy is strong. You do not attack where he is prepared. You wait for the moment of greatest thermodynamic advantage. You wait until his resources are exhausted, his attention is fragmented, or the entire ecosystem is tilted in your favor. You wait for mathematical certainty. When the equation dictates that annihilation will be total, and without wear to your own machinery, you apply the friction. This is asymmetric warfare in its purest state. The adversary wanted a street fight where chance could give him victory. You denied the fight and later sent a cruise missile to his base. Unilateral combustion, the masterstroke. When the sovereign finally decides to release friction and exercise punishment, he does so unilaterally. The biomass fights back and forth, exchanging blows until one yields from exhaustion. The monarch does not participate in exchanges. When you decide an obstacle must be removed, you do not debate. You do not warn it. You do not give it the chance to prepare. You release your gravitational mass in a single concentrated, silent and crushing impact. You apply all the force of your capital, your tactical intellect, and your geometric influence on a structural pressure point of the adversary. You do not seek to win an argument. You seek to break their thermodynamic will so that resistance ceases permanently. You do so with the cold dissociation of a surgeon amputating a necrotic limb. There is no hate in your blow. Hate is a thermal leak. There is purely the physics of high pressure. Once the blow is struck and the adversary crumbles, you do not stay to gloat over the ruins. Gloating is the vanity of the biomass. Immediately after the execution, you cut the supply of friction again, reinstate absolute zero in your core, and resume charged immobility as if nothing happened. The incombustible sovereign. The result of maintaining a strict monopoly on friction is the development of an aura of biological terror around you. Human society will quickly learn, through pure empirical experimentation, that trying to start a fire with you is useless and deadly. They will discover that if they attack, they are suffocated. They will find themselves choked by your contempt and tactical blindness. And they will discover that if you decide to attack them, you will do so when they least expect it, with a force they cannot counteract and without giving them a chance to defend. You become an incombustible object. The outside world no longer dares to scratch a match near your osmium core because they know you control the oxygen valves of the entire room. They know you dictate the temperature. You have ceased to be a victim of reactive circumstances. You are the absolute owner of the forge. Now that you control when and where matter is burned, it is time to learn to rewrite reality upon the smoking ash of others. You are the architect of the flame and the keeper of the cold. The board is now a manifestation of your thermal will, and every spark is a decree of your sovereign core. The mechanics of intentional inertia. Monopolizing friction requires the mastery of intentional inertia. Most humans move because they are pushed. The sovereign moves because he possesses an internal engine that ignores the wind. When you refuse to be moved by the provocations of the biomass, you are essentially increasing your effective mass. The world will try to ping you. Like sonar looking for a submarine, they will send small insults, minor inconveniences, and social jabs to see if you are solid. If you flinch, they have found your density. If you remain a vacuum, you become a ghost that haunts their strategic calculations. This is the silent wall technique. By making it impossible for others to predict your triggers, you make it impossible for them to manipulate you. A man whose anger can be bought with an insult is a man who can be owned for free. A man who owns his friction is a man who cannot be priced by the market. This internal insulation is what allows you to operate in high-stress environments without suffering material fatigue. While your competitors are burning out from the constant friction of office politics or social rivalry, you are cooling your systems in the anechoic chamber of your own making. The gravity of the unseen strike. Because you have monopolized friction, your actual strikes carry a shock value that is mathematically devastating. When a reactive man strikes, the world expects it. When the sovereign strikes, it feels like an act of God, unpredictable, overwhelming, and devoid of a visible cause. This perceived lack of cause is your greatest weapon. When you dismantle an opponent's project or relocate a resource, do not provide the emotional narrative. Do not tell them you are doing it because they offended you. If you give them a reason, you give them a handle to hold on to. Keep your motives in the dark. Let the impact be the only message. By detaching the punishment from the personal friction, you make the punishment appear as a fundamental shift in the environment. The victim doesn't feel attacked by a person. They feel erased by the new laws of the reality. This level of operational coldness is what separates the warlord from the god. A warlord needs a reason to fight. A god simply changes the geography. You are moving toward the latter. Your influence should be felt like a change in the weather, undeniable, pervasive, and completely indifferent to human protest. The preservation of the osmium core. Every victory won through friction is a potential trap. If you become addicted to the heat of winning, you are subtly ceding your monopoly back to the ego. You must treat every successful execution as a maintenance task, not a celebration. The core must remain at 0 Hertz. If you feel the warmth of pride after crushing an adversary, you are experiencing a thermal leak. You must immediately apply the internal vacuum. Remind yourself that the adversary was never a peer, but merely a structural obstruction that required removal. One does not celebrate clearing a drain. This detachment ensures that you do not become sticky. In the world of the biomass, winners often get bogged down by their own success, attracting parasites and new sources of friction. By maintaining your absolute coldness, you remain hydrophobic to social attachments and lingering dramas. You move through the ruins of your conquests with the same silence you had before you started. This makes you terrifyingly efficient. To the world, you are a force that appears, reorders the atoms of the situation, and vanishes back into the void of charged immobility. You are the ghost in the cinder, in the finality of the thermal seal. The ultimate stage of this monopoly is the thermal seal. At this point, your presence alone acts as a deterrent to friction. People in your vicinity will feel an instinctive drop in their own desire to compete or argue. Your density creates a quiet zone where the gaseous egos of others simply deflate. You become the standard by which all other pressures are measured. When you enter a room, the noise stops not because you demanded it, but because the noise finds no rebound surface in you. You have effectively colonized the acoustics of your life. Every word spoken to you must pass through your filter. This is the monopoly of friction realized. You are the only source of heat in your world, and everyone else is merely a reflection of your thermal decree. You have become the sun of your own system, giving life where you choose, and freezing into oblivion whatever dares to cross your path without permission. Chapter 6. The Blindness of the Legislator. The corpse of the present and the illusion of evidence. Ordinary man lives kneeling before the altar of what he calls reality. If his bank account is empty, if his body is sick, or if his empire is in ruins, the biomass bows its head and says, "This is what there is. I must be realistic." They confuse empirical observation with existential submission. In the heavy physics of absolute sovereignty, realism is the religion of slaves. To understand this, you must dissect what exactly this present is that terrifies humanity so much. The three-dimensional present you can see and touch is not an immovable wall. It is simply the residual smoke of a previous combustion. It is the delayed crystallization of decisions, fears, and attentions that you or the system around you emitted in the past. When you look at your current problems, you are not looking at the absolute truth. You are looking at a fossil. You are observing the corpse of an obsolete timeline. The quantum legislator repudiates empirical evidence of failure because he knows evidence is only frozen quantum mist. If you look at that corpse, accept it, and allow it to generate anxiety, you are committing a lethal thermodynamic error. You are injecting vital heat into a defective mold. By doing so, you defrost that mediocre reality, feed it with your gravity, and force it to repeat in your future. You become the gravedigger who buries his own sovereignty to honor a dead man. You breathe life into a ghost that was meant to dissipate, granting it a density it does not deserve. Tactical blindness as a forging tool. To impose an absolute mandate on the material universe, the monarch must develop a calculated optical pathology, the blindness of the legislator. A true legislator does not describe the world as it is. A legislator dictates how the world must be from the moment his signature touches the paper. When you sign your own thermodynamic constitution, you must become glacial and absolutely blind to any three-dimensional evidence that contradicts your decree. Imagine your financial empire is collapsing. The numbers are in red. The biomass around you screams that the ship is sinking and demands you panic. Gaseous man looks at the numbers and crumbles. The osmium core, conversely, deploys tactical blindness. You look at the ruin before you and, through a ballistic dissociation, withdraw all your gravitational mass from it. You refuse to recognize the authority of that ruin over your nervous system. You observe it as if watching a movie projected on the wall of your anechoic chamber. The image exists. The light hits the wall, but it has no volume, no weight, and does not alter the sub-bass frequency of your breathing. You have already internally decreed the restoration of the empire. Therefore you act, breathe, and operate with the crushing inertia of an emperor whose treasury is overflowing. By ignoring the present crisis with absolute mathematical contempt, you cut the oxygen supply to the collapse. You starve the disaster of the attention it needs to remain solid, writing the law upon the ashes of the world. The biomass demands to see in order to believe. That is the weakness of reactive matter. The sovereign operates under the opposite law. You dictate the gravity, and the three-dimensional world has no choice but to materialize evidence to accommodate your weight. You create the fact, the world creates the proof. When you are surrounded by the ashes of past failures, betrayals, or tactical errors, the mammalian instinct asks you to clean the ash, ask for forgiveness, and rebuild slowly. The legislator does not ask for forgiveness. The legislator advances directly over the smoking field and pulls out his diamond chisel. He begins to write the new law upon the ash itself. This writing is not an exercise in positive affirmations or esoteric self-deception. It is the imposition of a new barometric pressure. If you have decreed a territory belongs to you, you move your biological lead suit as if the title were already in your hands. Your body language expands. Your logistical decisions stop being based on survival and start being based on the administration of dominion. You take the initiative without asking permission from external reality, because for you, external reality suffers from an unacceptable technological delay. You already inhabit the crystallization of triumph. The physical world is simply sweating the friction to catch up to you. You do not wait for the signal. You are the signal. The world is merely the medium through which your intent must travel, and it will distort itself to fit your new coordinates. Inertial friction, the delay of the physical universe. By applying the blindness of the legislator and emitting your decree, a phenomenon of structural stress will occur in your environment. Heavy matter, circumstances, money, people, has inertia. When a concrete block is moving south and you hit it with your gravity to force it north, it doesn't turn instantly. First it must break, stopping its previous momentum, the crisis, and then it must accelerate in the new direction, your decree. That braking process generates immense inertial friction. In this transition period, the three-dimensional scenery will seem to resist. Things may briefly worsen. Crises may throw one last agonizing spasm. This is where 99% of men break. They look at the spasm of matter, their tactical blindness fails. They give authority back to the evidence and exclaim, "It's not working. Reality is stronger than me." In that second of doubt, they withdraw their pressure. The sovereign knows the physics of inertial delay. When the world creaks and resists your new law, the monarch does not blink. You settle into the Osmium throne and increase the charged immobility. You understand that the chaos you witness is not the universe challenging you. It is the universe breaking its bones. It is breaking its bones to comply with the monstrous order you just gave. Temporal chaos is the thermodynamic proof that your gravity is bending the steel of reality. You endure that friction without sweating, blind to doubt, deaf to panic, and lethally anchored in the certainty of your geometry. The Emperor's madness, the external perspective, sustaining tactical blindness, will isolate you socially in a brutal and definitive way. In the eyes of the biomass, you will have gone mad. Your family, former partners, and the gaseous mass will point at you. They will see you surrounded by rubble, yet you act with the glacial pride of a king at his peak. They will tell you, "Open your eyes, you have nothing, be humble, accept defeat." They will try to drag you into their pit of pity and cheap realism, because your refusal to suffer offends them. It proves their own suffering is optional, and there is nothing the biomass hates more than being victims by choice. This is the baptism of fire of absolutism. If the opinion of these papier-mâché shadows matters to you even a milligram, you are not fit for the Osmium crown. Their reality has no jurisdiction in your anechoic chamber. For you, they are defective organisms scanning a fossil, while you mold the hot clay. You look at them with the clinical contempt of a predator that no longer shares a species with them. You do not bother explaining your quantum architecture because the acoustics of absolute power do not translate into the language of slaves. You let them call you crazy, delusional, or arrogant. All that defamation is simple kinetic energy bouncing uselessly against your wall of infinite density. And then, when the inertia of the physical world finally yields, when matter crystallizes exactly in the form you decreed and your empire materializes, their condemnation will turn into terror. The final collapse of the mist at your feet. When inertial delay ends, physical reality surrenders all at once. It is not a smooth transition. The three-dimensional world, exhausted by trying to resist the suffocating pressure of your constant gravity, collapses. Financial opportunities open violently. Adversaries disappear or submit without conditions. Circumstances rearrange with astonishing mathematical precision to reflect the law you wrote when everything was in ruins. The blindness of the legislator has led you to empirical triumph. You refuse to see the obstacle, and by withdrawing attention, the obstacle disintegrated for lack of oxygen. You sit on the throne, surrounded by the physical evidence of your quantum dictatorship, and discover the last truth of this chapter. The universe has no will of its own. It is an immense black obsidian mirror, lazy and dense, that will do anything to make you stop pressing it. It seeks the path of least resistance. If you apply the pressure of complaint, it gives you misery, so you keep complaining. If you apply the ballistic and non-negotiable pressure of absolute sovereignty, it will hand you the empire just to balance the thermodynamic equation. You have rewritten the law, you have ignored the illusion of defeat. The architecture of the void mandate. To maintain the blindness of the legislator, you must build an internal event horizon. Inside this horizon, only your decree exists. Outside, there is the noise of the world, which you treat as unrendered data. You are the programmer of your own simulation, and you refuse to load the textures of failure. This requires a total amputation of the social mirror. Most humans check the faces of others to see if they are doing well. If the world looks worried, they become worried. The sovereign has no mirror. He has a projector. He projects his internal state onto the world until the world reflects it back. When you walk into a meeting where your projects are being criticized, you do not listen to the criticism. You listen to the frequency of your own core. You speak as if the success is already a historical fact. This creates a reality warp that others find impossible to resist. They start to doubt their own eyes. Your certainty is so heavy that their facts start to feel light and flimsy. They begin to wonder if you know something they don't. This is the seed of their submission. By being blind to their reality, you force them to become blind to it as well, and join yours. You are the primary source of gravity. The sterilization of the past. The greatest threat to your blindness is the memory leak. The ego loves to remind you of who you used to be or how many times you failed before. These are ghosts trying to steal your mass. To be a true legislator, you must perform a daily sterilization of your memory. The past has no more reality than a dream you had last night. It carries no weight unless you grant it the fuel of your attention. When a memory of failure arises, you apply the obsidian scalpel. You cut the emotional cord and treat the memory as a data point from a different, inferior organism. You are not the man who failed yesterday. You are the core that exists now, and this core has just issued a new decree. The universe does not care about your history. It only cares about the current pressure of your gravity. By being new in every millisecond, you become unpredictable and unstoppable. This is the amputation of narrative. You stop telling yourself the story of your life. Stories are for authors. Decrees are for kings. You do not have a story. You have a series of logistical expansions. This prevents the scar tissue of the past from hardening and limiting your current range of motion. The sovereign's solitude. This level of blindness creates a profound existential solitude. You are living in a world that hasn't happened yet, while everyone else is trapped in the decay of what is. You will find that you have nothing to say to those who inhabit the real world. Their concerns will seem like the buzzing of insects. Embrace this isolation. It is the vacuum insulation that keeps your core at absolute zero. The more you connect with the reality of others, the more you dilute your own power. Your solitude is the measure of your sovereignty. The higher you rise in density, the fewer peers you will find. You are the only inhabitant of your empire, until the world catches up and provides you with subjects. And even then, you remain alone in the center of the well. The subjects see the results. Only the monarch knows the cost of the blindness that produced them. You are the architect of the invisible. Now that you have mastered the art of ignoring the fossilized present, you are ready to use your gravity to manipulate the hidden strings of the ecosystem. You have broken the mirror. Now you will command the light. The world is a clay that only hardens when you stop looking away. Keep your gaze fixed on the throne. Chapter 7. The Asymmetry of Quantum Warfare. The thermodynamic stupidity of symmetrical warfare. Since the dawn of civilization, the biomass has been indoctrinated with a primitive and bestial view of conflict, symmetrical warfare. If the enemy raises a sword, you must raise another. If the enemy screams, you must scream louder. If a competitor invests capital to destroy you, you must burn your own resources to stop them. The heavy physics of conscious matter observes this clashing of rams with the deepest contempt. Symmetrical warfare is thermodynamic suicide. When you oppose force with force, you are implicitly recognizing that the adversary has the same three-dimensional jurisdiction as you. You are validating their mass and existence. By colliding with them, you generate a colossal friction that wears down the structural integrity of both parties. Even if you win the symmetrical combat, you do so at the cost of denting your own armor, bleeding your thermal energy, and losing your center of gravity. Winning with effort is the defeat of kings. The sovereign does not descend into the arena to exchange punches with smoke. The monarch imposes asymmetrical warfare. In quantum asymmetry, you do not destroy the enemy by applying superior force. You annihilate them by withdrawing physical resistance from your coordinates, letting their own inertia drag them. Acoustic refraction and the total absorption panel. To master this silent annihilation, we must observe the mechanics of conflict through acoustic engineering. When a gaseous organism decides to attack you, be it through betrayal, a reputational strike, or a hostile corporate maneuver, it is emitting a sound wave charged with hatred, envy, or desperation. In interior design, an asymmetric room without sound-absorbing treatment is a refraction hell. If you make a loud noise in a room with bare walls, the sound hits, refracts at sharp angles, multiplies in blind corners, and creates a deafening reverberation. The mind of the ordinary man is that untreated room. When they receive an attack, their ego acts as a rigid wall. They refract the noise of aggression. They become indignant, strike back, and in doing so, amplify the stridency of the conflict until both suffocate in the echo of their own drama. The sovereign operates under a radically different set of physics. You have lined the architecture of your mind with the insulation panels of charged immobility. When the enemy projectile impacts your coordinates, it finds no wall of vanity to bounce off. It finds a hyperdense material designed for absolute absorption. You hear the threat, but you do not refract the wave. The overheating of the aggressor, the render collapse. There is an immense metabolic and computational cost in the act of hating or attacking another human being. For your enemy to sustain a war against you, their brain must constantly process and render the image of your destruction in the three-dimensional plane. They must invest massive amounts of RAM. They waste biological memory scheming scenarios, calculating your possible responses, and injecting adrenaline into their bloodstream. They are pushing their machinery to the limit, processing data at a hysterical speed to keep hostility alive. The quantum legislator uses this as a weapon of passive siege. While the aggressor burns their processing capacity trying to render a war, you install yourself in the zero frequency. You do not spend a single byte of internal memory thinking about them. You dedicate no bandwidth to their existence. You continue executing projects and editing your reality with cold processors. What occurs empirically? The enemy's system begins to suffer thermal throttling. Receiving no response from you, they grow desperate. They increase the intensity of their attacks, requiring even more caloric consumption. Their biological motor overheats. They commit tactical errors and become erratic. The Aikido of gravity, the space slingshot. When aggression is imminent and physical or logistical contact is inevitable, the sovereign does not flee. He applies the gravitational slingshot. In space exploration, when a ship needs to accelerate without spending fuel, it does not ignite its engines. It heads directly toward a massive planet's orbit. It uses the planet's immense gravity to gain monstrous speed and then slingshots into the void. This is called gravity assist. In asymmetrical warfare, you are the massive planet. The enemy is the satellite coming at full speed trying to crash against your surface. The weak man would try to slow the impact. The sovereign takes a subtle step toward the vacuum, pivots on his osmium axis, and lets the enemy's inertia enter his gravitational well. You grab the strength of their commercial attack or emotional extortion, and instead of stopping it, you accelerate it. You allow their own weight to carry them past you. If they accuse you publicly to shame you, you do not defend yourself by denying it. Friction. You assume it with a contempt so glacial and absolute that the accusation loses its moral character and becomes an irrelevant anecdote. You take their poison, cool it in your system, and use it to prove you are untouchable. Execution in the vacuum, frictionless punishment. Perfect asymmetry culminates when you understand that omission is the most devastating punishment in the universe. The biomass believes punishing means inflicting active pain. They believe in kinetic revenge. The sovereign knows that active pain is still a form of thermodynamic connection and validation. If you bother to actively ruin your enemy, you are showing them they still have importance in your registry. You are granting them the status of worthy of being destroyed. The monarch's punishment is execution in the vacuum, annihilation through the absolute withdrawal of gravity and attention. When you decide an ally has become a parasite or a competitor, no longer deserves to breathe your oxygen, you do not unleash a storm of rage. There are no farewell speeches or theatrical warnings. You simply execute a surgical cut in the supply of your attention. You become acoustically blind and deaf. You cut logistical channels and block energy transmission. For you, that entity ceases to occupy volume in space. For the enemy, this is infinitely worse than being attacked. Being attacked validates their existence. Being erased through geometric indifference throws them into the abyss of existential terror, the invulnerability of the non-combatant. By mastering the asymmetry of quantum warfare, you become the most dangerous anomaly on the board, the warrior who refuses to fight and yet never loses ground. Society does not know how to classify an individual who does not react to provocations, but whose enemies always collapse under their own weight. They will fear you not for the strength of your blows, but for the relentless coldness of your vacuum. They will understand that crossing your event horizon with hostile intentions is a guarantee of mathematical disintegration. You have stopped participating in the vulgarity of human warfare and shifted to heavy physics. Where mass density and acoustic refraction dictate survival, you are the apex. And now that you know how to annihilate without offering resistance, you are ready to assume the thermodynamic cost of this power, the frigid and suffocating isolation of the supreme altitude. Your silence is now a lethal weapon, the logistics of the absent target. In the geometry of the sovereign, the greatest defense is to not be there where the blow lands. This is not physical flight, but dimensional displacement. When the enemy attacks your ego, they find only a hollow shell because your true self is anchored in the osmium core, miles below the social surface. The biomass attacks identities. They attack reputations and social standings. If you have decoupled your conscious matter from these flimsy constructs, the enemy is attacking a ghost. They are wasting ammunition on a decoy while you operate from the shadows of the unrendered sublayer. This makes you a moving target in a stationary world. While they are aiming at where you were, the person who cared about their opinion, you have already shifted to a new state of density where their weapons have no caliber. You are essentially ghosting the entire conflict by refusing to occupy the target zone. This produces a specific type of mental fatigue in the aggressor, known as void sickness. When a predator cannot find the pulse of its prey, it begins to hallucinate. The enemy will start fighting ghosts, seeing your influence in places where you haven't even stepped, and exhausting their remaining sanity. The strategic use of ghosting. Ghosting is not a social retreat, it is a tactical blackout. In the age of hyperconnectivity, the biomass expects an immediate response to every stimulus. By denying this response, you are effectively jamming their radar. You create a zone of zero information that forces the enemy to fill the gaps with their own fears. When a partner or a rival tries to provoke a reaction, your silence acts as a mirror that reflects their own instability back at them. They look for a sign of impact, and finding none, they assume the impact was so deep it went through them, or so shallow it didn't register. Both thoughts are terrifying. You use this blackout to reorganize your assets. While the enemy is distracted by your silence, you are moving your heavy pieces into position. By the time you reappear, the board has been redesigned. Your reappearance is not a response to their attack, but the implementation of a new reality. This is the beauty of the ghost strategy. You are never defending. You are simply not participating in their version of the world while you build your own. You are a sovereign entity that does not acknowledge the legal status of the enemy's war. To you, they are not a combatant. They are a glitch. The entropy of the obsessed. The enemy who obsesses over your destruction is essentially donating their life force to your cause. Their obsession is a tether that ties their energy to your gravitational well. Every hour they spend thinking about how to hurt you is an hour they are not spending on their own expansion. You, meanwhile, are totally free. Because you do not hate them, you do not carry their weight. You are light, cold, and efficient. The obsessed enemy eventually becomes a hollowed-out version of themselves, a parasitic moon that has burned all its atmosphere, trying to reach a planet that doesn't feel its pull. When they finally break, you do not celebrate. You simply observe the debris of their collapse and decide if there is any material worth salvaging for your own empire. You treat their downfall as a natural geological event. It is the inevitable result of an object with low density trying to orbit a singularity. This is the final stage of invulnerability, when you realize that your enemies are not obstacles, but energy donors who liquidate themselves for your benefit. Their hatred is the fuel that densifies your legend. You are the silent beneficiary of their self-destruction, the quiet reaper of the gaseous harvest. The Sub-Zero Protocol. To maintain this state, you must implement the Sub-Zero Protocol within your internal architecture. This means that no matter how loud the world gets, the temperature of your decision-making core never rises above the threshold of pure logic. You filter every external input through a layer of liquid nitrogen. If an input carries emotional heat, it is discarded before it reaches the core. You only process cold data, numbers, trajectories, mass, and timing. This makes your responses, when you choose to give them, appear robotic and alien to the biomass, further increasing their biological terror. They cannot empathize with you, and therefore they cannot predict you. You have moved beyond the human, all too human realm of conflict and into the cold, dark world of stellar mechanics. You are a celestial body following its own path, and any collision is merely an opportunity for your mass to grow. The board is now silent. The enemies have overheated and stalled. You stand in the center of the vacuum, a sovereign of the cold, ready to dictate the new laws of the post-war ecosystem. The transition is complete. You are the ghost, the planet, and the law. Chapter 8. The Isolation of the Monarch, the Suffocating Altitude. The Stratosphere of Power, and the Oxygen of the Multitude. In the physical geography of the planet, there is a non-negotiable rule regarding altitude. As you ascend, atmospheric pressure drops, and oxygen becomes scarce. In the low valleys, the air is dense, warm, and saturated with life. That is where the biomass dwells. In the valley, there is noise, constant friction, and herd warmth. It is easy to breathe there because the environment does the work for you. But at the summit of the 8,000ers, in the stratosphere of the world, the air is a knife of ice. There is no shelter, no borrowed heat. Any biological organism not forged to withstand that lack of oxygen will die of hypoxia in hours. The architecture of absolute power operates under this exact same thermodynamics. Ordinary man fantasies about being the king, but wishes to rule from the comfort of the valley. They want power, respect, and wealth, but they also want to keep going to the tavern to drink with the crowd and feel the warm embrace of camaraderie. They demand the crown, but refuse to pay the altitude tax. Heavy physics repudiates this fantasy. Absolute sovereignty is a state of geometric elevation. When you forge your gravitational well and begin to curve the cinder board in your favor, your osmium core pushes you violently upward, separating you. In that altitude, the oxygen of human drama, social validation, and cheap empathy simply ceases to exist. You cannot rule the multitude if you insist on being their friend. Friendship, in the vulgar terms of the biomass, is an agreement of mutual weakness, a pact to share gas so as not to feel the cold. The amputation of thermal camaraderie. The first symptom of this suffocating altitude is the rapid and lethal disintegration of your social circles. As your density increases and your anechoic chamber rejects acoustic bounce, The people who used to feed off your friction will begin to feel a visceral panic in your presence. At first, they will try to drag you back to the valley. They will tell you that you have changed, that you have become cold, arrogant, or inaccessible. They will use emotional extortion, projecting their own hypoxia onto you. One can no longer talk to you, they will say, as their lungs collapse. The weak seeker feels guilt at this accusation. He bows his head, apologizes, and descends the mountain, betraying his own sovereignty to go back to warming the pigs in the mud. The quantum legislator feels no guilt. He feels the empirical confirmation of his ascent. It is thermodynamic proof. You execute the amputation of thermal camaraderie without anesthesia. You do not try to explain barometric pressure to organisms that only understand mud. You leave them behind. You accept that the relationship has lost its geometric utility, and you cut the supply. A leviathan cannot swim in a kiddie pool. The ecosystem of the cold void, endogenous sovereignty. The isolation of the monarch is not a punishment cell. It is a laboratory of high-energy physics. When you are left completely alone at the summit, stripped of the noise of cowardly advisors and frightened relatives, you face the cold void. For the man who still retains traces of ego, this void is terrifying. The ego screams in the dark, begging for a mirror to confirm its existence. But you already suffocated the ego. You inhabit the osmium core. In extreme isolation, you discover the ballistic power of endogenous sovereignty. Having no one to applaud your victories or comfort your defeats, your motor becomes self-sufficient. You become a perfect closed system. You generate the order, you execute the impact, you audit the result, and you assimilate the terrain. There are no leaks. In this crushing solitude, your charged immobility reaches its most lethal frequency. You don't have to fake smiles or soften your decrees. You can operate the heavy machinery of your empire with the necessary violence and coldness, because there are no weak witnesses to be scandalized by the blood on the cinderboard. Solitude grants you the license to be ruthless. You are the judge, the jury, and the executioner of your own physical laws. The acoustic terror of the multitude facing the summit. It is crucial to understand how the biomass perceives your isolation. From the valley, the multitude looks up toward the summit where you operate. They cannot see your face clearly, for you are wrapped in the clouds of your own gravity. They cannot hear your doubts, for in your chamber there is no echo. The only thing the mass perceives is the crushing inertia of your decisions falling upon them like blocks of granite. Isolation generates an acoustic terror in the adversary. Corporations, rivals, or systems trying to compete with you go mad trying to decipher you. They send radar waves that never return. Having no telemetry on your emotions or fears, their mammalian imagination runs wild. They grant you magical powers. They consider you a force of nature. Mystery is the cheapest and most effective multiplier of gravitational mass. If a king walks among plebeians every day, he becomes vulgar and overthrowable. If the sovereign locks himself in the obsidian vault and only communicates through the ballistic execution of the law, he becomes a dark god. Your silence forces them to project their worst terrors onto your figure. They win your wars for you, surrendering to a monster they invented in your absence. Final compression, embracing social necrosis. To sustain this absolute power, you must fall in love with the cold. You must embrace what ordinary psychology would consider social necrosis. There will come a point where the abyss between your sub-bass frequency and the stridencies of the world is so vast that trivial communication becomes painful. You will see the biomass running in circles, burning their linear time on minuscule dramas, and you will feel the same disconnection an astronomer feels observing the erratic movement of ants under a microscope. Do not try to save them. Do not try to wake them up. That is the Messiah syndrome. The quantum legislator does not save the ash. He simply steps on it to gain traction. Accept the suffocating altitude as your natural state. Feel the frigid weight of the crown pressing against your skull, and do not complain of the thermodynamic migraine. You are alone because you are the only capable mass. You have traded the warmth of the stable for the invulnerability of space armor. You sit on the empty throne in the center of nothingness, breathing the freezing air where men die. You watch the cinderboard stretching at your feet, knowing every movement obeys the physical laws you dictated from the summit. The pathology of the singularity, True isolation is not the absence of people, but the absence of peers. When you achieve the density of osmium, you become a singularity in the social fabric. A singularity does not have neighbors, it has an event horizon. Beyond that horizon, the laws of the valley no longer apply and communication breaks down. The biomass interprets this as a pathology. They will diagnose you with detachment, sociopathy, or narcissism. These are merely the names they give to a pressure they cannot survive. To you, these labels are as irrelevant as the sound of dry leaves crunching under a tank's tread. They are the friction of the weak. You must cultivate a radical indifference to the human condition. The human condition is a state of constant gas leakage. By choosing isolation, you are choosing to be post-human. You are moving toward the condition of the celestial body, objects that do not feel lonely but simply follow their orbital path. This social necrosis is the ultimate filter. It ensures that only those who are willing to breathe your thin air can approach your orbit. You stop being a destination for the needy and become a lighthouse for the lethal. Only those with their own gravitational wells will be able to stand in your presence without collapsing. The silence of the high command. In the altitude of the monarch, words are treated as precious munitions. You do not waste them on small talk or social lubricant. Every sentence you utter is a structural adjustment of the reality below. This economy of language is what allows your decrees to maintain their ballistic velocity. When you are isolated, your internal dialogue also changes. You stop debating with yourself. You stop asking, what if? You replace the internal committee of the ego with the single heavy voice of the legislator. Your mind becomes a command center where only the objective and the execution exist. This internal silence is the foundation of your external power. A man who is at war with himself cannot conquer a territory. A man who is a silent monolith within can shatter any external resistance. The altitude purifies your intent, boiling away the impurities of doubt and the slag of sentimentality. You become a weapon of pure intent. The solitude is the cooling system for your high-intensity focus. Without the heat of others, your internal processes can run at speeds that would melt a gaseous mind. You see the board with a clarity that is only possible when the air is frozen and the light is direct. The sovereign's refined consumption. Isolation also dictates a new form of consumption. You no longer consume entertainment or information to pass the time. Time is your most valuable kinetic resource. You consume only what increases your density, technical data, strategic history, and the cold mathematics of your specific industry. You stop being a consumer and become an assimilator. Everything that enters your event horizon is broken down into its fundamental components and integrated into your osmium core. You read the world as a series of pressure points and vulnerabilities. Your isolation is the laboratory where this data is refined. This makes you a terrifyingly efficient machine of acquisition. While the biomass is distracted by the latest viral nonsense, you are studying the structural weaknesses of your competitors' financial hulls. Your solitude gives you the time mass necessary to outcalculate and outweight every other player. You are the hunter who sits still for years, while the prey exhausts itself in a single season. The altitude allows you to see the long-term trajectories that the valley dwellers ignore. You are not playing the game of the day, you are playing the game of the era. Your isolation is your fortress of foresight. The final ascendance to the monolith. Eventually, the transition is complete. You no longer feel the need for the valley. The idea of descending to seek warmth or validation feels as absurd as a star wanting to become a campfire. You have achieved a state of permanent, cold ascendance. You are the monolith at the top of the world. From this position, you observe the end of Chapter 8. You have forged the well, radiated the heat, issued the decree, and embraced the isolation. You are now a complete physical system, a sovereign entity that exists independently of the world's permission. You are the fixed point in a chaotic universe. The cinderboard is silent. The air is thin. The crown is heavy. You are alone and you are finally absolutely free. The only thing left is to apply this total mass to the final reorganization of the world. You are ready to become the architect of the aftermath. Chapter 9. The Osmium Crown, the Price of Absolutism. The End of the Gravitational Alibi. Human biomass survives its pathetic existence thanks to a thermodynamic defense mechanism designed for the weak, the external alibi. When their lives collapse, when poverty suffocates them, or their relationships rot, gaseous man raises his index finger and points outward. They blame the economy, they blame the betrayal of their partners. They blame their genetics or bad luck. By transferring blame, they are transferring their weight. They become light, floating in the relief of victimization and exempting themselves from the painful friction of having to rebuild their own foundations. The physics of absolute power destroys this alibi with a steel sledgehammer. If you have decided to sit on the empty throne in the center of nothingness, if you have forged the gravitational well so that the three-dimensional universe orbits around you, you must accept the non-negotiable law of total causality. You cannot claim the monopoly of gravity to attract success and deny it when you attract disaster. If you are the center of the solar system, absolutely everything that crashes against your surface was attracted by your own mass. This we call the Osmium crown. It is not a shiny jewel designed to stroke your ego. It is a ring of the densest matter in the universe, placed directly upon your skull. It exerts a barometric pressure so monstrous that it would crush the spinal column of any organism not forged in titanium. The price of absolutism is absolute thermal responsibility. You are the prime cause. Every impact, every fracture, and every harvest in your territory is a direct mathematical result of your own density, the timeline and the rendering of catastrophe. To assimilate this level of responsibility without going mad, you must observe material reality with the same coldness with which a master editor observes the timeline of his software. The external three-dimensional world is not a random event. It is the final rendering of the decisions and frequencies you encoded. If the final frame projected in the obsidian mirror shows a financial catastrophe or a bloody betrayal, the biomass screams and hits the monitor, blaming the hardware. The quantum legislator does not throw tantrums. He understands that if the rendering failed, it is because he himself introduced a defective code. The sovereign assumes the catastrophe by looking directly into the abyss and saying, "I brought this. My past weakness, my lack of tactical isolation, or my overconfidence allowed this friction to enter the timeline." There is no weeping, no self-pity. By assuming you are the only editor, you become the only rebuilder. Assuming total responsibility automatically confirms you as the only editor capable of purging the track, recalibrating the parameters, and re-rendering the empire. Guilt makes you a slave to the past. Thermodynamic responsibility makes you the absolute owner of the next frame. You own the error, thus you own the fix. The audit of acoustic fissures. When misfortune impacts your ecosystem, the mammalian instinct will demand you seek revenge against external agents. It will ask you to punish those who failed you. But the monarch knows that the external agent is merely a vector. The true failure is always architectural and internal. You are the leak. If an enemy attack managed to penetrate your anechoic chamber and generated an echo in your life, you do not curse the stridency of the enemy. You audit your own walls. You recognize with a clinical cruelty toward yourself that you left a fissure in the sound-absorbing treatment of your own psyche. There was a millisecond where you blinked. There was an instant where you lowered your density and allowed the oxygen of drama to seep into your vacuum chamber. The enemy only did what the physics of fluids dictates: enter where there is a pressure gap. You provided the low-pressure zone for their storm. Wearing the Osmium crown means that, in the face of betrayal, your first thought is not, "How could they do this?" but "What gravitational defect in my core made them believe they could survive the consequences of betraying me?" When the world lacks respect for you, it is because your charged immobility was too light. The punishment of the Titan, holding the sky. The biomass cannot bear this weight. If you told a gaseous man that he is the architect of 100% of his misfortunes, his ego would fracture, and he would fall into a catatonic depression. They need the illusion of innocence to be able to get up in the morning. They need a devil to blame for their hell. The sovereign is not innocent, nor does he aspire to be. Innocence is for the sheep at the slaughterhouse. The sovereign is the Titan who holds the celestial vault upon his shoulders. Supporting the Osmium crown means that you never, ever complain about circumstances. Complaint is a thermal leak, a gasp of weakness. If your investments sink, you do not complain about the economy. If your physical health fails, you do not complain about genetics. You keep your lips sealed, your neck rigid, and your gaze anchored on the event horizon. You hold the weight of your own collapsing empire without emitting a single acoustic groan. This silent assumption of disaster generates a reverential terror in your enemies. They expect to see you crumble under the pressure. They expect you to seek a scapegoat to save your prestige. Instead, they see you sitting amidst the rubble with the crown sinking into your skull, operating with ballistic slowness. The end of morality, the solitude of the prime cause. By accepting that you are the absolute legislator of your reality, you must prepare for the final amputation, the amputation of human morality. Three-dimensional morality is designed to regulate friction between weak entities. It dictates what is fair and unfair, so that the biomass does not annihilate itself. But when you become the prime cause, when you are gravity itself, morality ceases to apply. The law of gravity is not fair or unfair. When it makes a bird with a broken wing fall, it simply is. Under the Osmium crown, the concept of injustice evaporates from your vocabulary. Everything is just physics. If you lose, it was not unfair. It was thermodynamically inevitable due to your lack of mass at that specific point in time. If you crush a competitor and reduce them to ashes, you are not evil. You simply occupied the vacuum that their weakness left available. You are a phenomenon, not a person. You are left alone before the mathematics of the universe. There is no God to punish you if you are cruel, nor a karma to reward you if you are merciful. There is only inertia, heat transfer, and barometric pressure. You are the only god of your ecosystem, responsible for every plague and every harvest. The invulnerability of the absolute architect. Accepting the price of absolutism is the ultimate test of fire for conscious matter. Many power seekers approach the throne, feel the spine-chilling cold of the metal and the incalculable weight of the Osmium crown, and recoil in horror. They prefer to return to the valley where they can be comfortable slaves. They prefer to complain about the government, their bosses and their partners, maintaining the sweet and lukewarm illusion that they are victims of a capricious universe. You have crossed the point of no return. You have lowered your head, allowed the crown to settle, and you have raised your gaze. The weight is monstrous, but the moment you decide you will not bend, the final thermodynamic alchemy occurs. Extreme pressure fuses the atoms of your consciousness into an unbreakable singularity. By accepting that 100% of reality is your responsibility, you gain 100% of the power. You have become the perfect closed system. The excuse has died. The victim has been incinerated. You are forged, calibrated, and weighed. And now that you hold the sky without trembling, you are ready for the geometric climax of existence, to merge with the physical law itself and operate in singularity. The sovereignty of the internal audit. To sustain the Osmium crown, the monarch must implement a perpetual internal audit. Every event in the external render is traced back to a specific internal vibration. If a project stalls, the sovereign does not look at the project's logistics. He looks at the specific moment his focus wavered and allowed entropy in. This level of self-scrutiny is not an act of self-flagellation, but an act of high-level engineering. You treat your own psyche as a nuclear reactor. Any unfortunate event is merely a diagnostic report indicating a containment failure. You fix the leak at the core and the external radiation naturally stabilizes. This prevents you from becoming entangled with the world. While the biomass is busy fighting with the reflections in the mirror, you are busy adjusting the projector. This is the ultimate strategic advantage. You never lose time in conflict with others because you are too busy maintaining the integrity of your own mass. Your enemies become irrelevant variables. They are merely the debris that your gravity pulls in. If they cause damage, it is because you allowed them to enter your orbit without a proper defensive perimeter. You correct your coordinates, increase your density, and the problem resolves itself through sheer physical pressure. The vacuum of external praise. Just as you assume total responsibility for failure, the Osmium crown demands that you assume total responsibility for success. which means you must reject all external praise. If the world applauds you, and you feel the warmth of that applause, you are once again becoming light and dependent on the environment. Praise is just as dangerous as blame. Both are attempts by the biomass to influence your internal temperature. The sovereign accepts a victory as a natural result of his mathematical constants. He does not celebrate because he expected to win. To celebrate is to admit that the outcome was in doubt. You maintain a flatline metabolism. Whether you are losing a billion or gaining a billion, the frequency of your osmium core remains at absolute zero. This indifference to the quality of the render is what allows you to maintain the crown. You are not a player in the game, you are the hardware the game runs on. By being immune to praise, you become invisible to the manipulation of the crowd. They cannot use glory to lure you into the valley. You remain at the summit, heavy and silent, knowing that the only audit that matters is the one performed by the laws of physics upon your own structural integrity. The geometry of the absolute void. The final realization of the osmium crown is that the universe is empty until you occupy it with your decree. There is no destiny written in the stars. There is only the path of least resistance. By becoming the densest object in your sector, you become the destination of all paths. You are the destination. You are the... This is the 0 point of the monarch. You stop trying to do things and you simply are the reason things happen. Your presence alone is the legislative act. When you sit in a room, the air pressure changes because you are there. You don't need to speak. Your gravity does the work of 1,000 decrees. In this state, the distinction between action and being dissolves. Your very existence is a permanent strike against the entropy of the world. You are the monolith that prevents the cinderboard from blowing away in the wind of chaos. You provide the anchor for the reality of everyone else in your orbit. The price of this is the total loss of the human experience of surprise. You are never surprised by anything because everything is your own code returning to you. You inhabit a world of perfect predictability, where the only variable is the strength of your own will. This is the sublime boredom of the gods, the final fusion with the law. As the osmium crown settles permanently, your consciousness undergoes a phase shift. You no longer feel the weight of the crown because you are the weight. You have merged with the gravity you created. The separation between the self and the empire disappears. The empire is just your extended body. You operate from the singularity. Every thought is an order. Every order is a physical transformation. The delay between the decree and the render becomes shorter and shorter until reality becomes instantaneous. You have achieved the lead state, the point where no external force can penetrate your density. The Book of the Sovereign is almost complete. You have mastered the acoustics, the thermodynamics, the isolation, and the responsibility. You stand as the prime cause, the architect of the aftermath, the silent king of the cinder. The board is now yours to rearrange as you see fit. You look down at the biomass from your frozen peak, not with hatred, but with the cold neutrality of a star looking at dust. You are ready for the final chapter, the one that cannot be written with words, but only with the absolute silence of the perfect, unmoving, and eternal sovereign. Chapter 10, the state of singularity. The final transmutation, from operator to mathematical constant. During your journey through the desert of ash and the dissection of your own heavy illusion, you were an operator. You were an architect, learning to use the tools of thermodynamics, structural acoustics, and quantum optics to alter the three-dimensional board. You took your attention and compressed it into an industrial laser. You applied it to matter to force it to change shape. You were an outsider in the universe, a hyperdense invader imposing his will on a hostile environment. The evolutionary pinnacle of conscious matter demands the death of the operator. There comes an exact point in the curve of gravitational compression where the pressure is immense, where tactical isolation is so perfect that the separation between you and the tools disappears. A structural transmutation occurs. You stop applying the laws of physics to manipulate reality, and you become the law of physics itself. You have reached the state of singularity. In astrophysics, the singularity is not an object. It is a point of infinite mass and zero volume, in the center of a black hole that simply is. Its mere existence defines the geometry of all space and time around it. The entire universe has to rewrite its mathematics to accommodate the singularity. Upon reaching this state, you no longer force the biomass to obey. Your osmium core has become a non-negotiable mathematical constant in the ecosystem. Existing and dominating become exactly the same verb. You are no longer doing power. You are the fabric through which power flows. Every atom in your vicinity must now account for your mass before it dares to move. The collapse of distance, will and destiny as synonyms, the perpetual condemnation of gaseous man is distance. There is a kilometric and exhausting abyss between what the biomass desires and what reality delivers. They spend their entire lives running through that abyss, burning fuel, sweating blood, and begging luck to reduce the distance between fantasy and destiny. This distance is called hope, and as we have established, hope is the most toxic gas in the universe. In the state of singularity, distance collapses to zero. When conscious matter reaches its critical mass, the inertial friction that separated your decree from its physical manifestation disintegrates instantly. There is no longer a waiting process between emitting the order and the universe complying. Your will and destiny become absolute synonyms fused by the immense heat of your own gravity. If the sovereign decrees an empire must rise, he does not experience the anxiety of construction. It is a thermodynamic fact. The empire is already a fact in the millisecond. The idea crosses the event horizon of his mind. That physical bricks take linear time to stack in the 3D world is a mere logistical formality, a pathetic slowness of ordinary matter that does not alter the monarch's certainty. You do not travel toward the goal. The future is a block of marble that has already been sucked toward your core, being crushed into the exact shape of your will. You do not attract success. You do not manifest victory. You are the inevitable event toward which all circumstantial matter is rushing at terminal velocity. The end is the beginning. The Leviathan in the ocean of ash. Operating from the singularity, your way of inhabiting human society acquires monstrous and frigid dimensions. You are no longer a king competing with other kings. You have become the Leviathan. The Leviathan is the apex predator of the abyss. It does not swim frantically like the schools of surface fish. It does not seek food or dodge threats. The Leviathan floats in absolute darkness, withstanding barometric pressures that would crush naval steel, moving with a slowness that terrifies inferior species. Its slowness is not weakness. It is the inertia of incalculable mass that does not need to hurry. Everything that enters its waters already belongs to it. When you walk through the metropolises of the human world, the financial markets and corporate hierarchies, you are that abyssal monster swimming in an ocean of ash. The human biomass will emit its small sonar pulses. They will try to sell you their crises. They will offer their political hysterias and moral dramas. The Leviathan does not respond to those high-frequency noises. You observe them thrashing in the water, burning their oxygen in stupid symmetrical wars, while you glide beneath their radars. Your presence alters the currents without a single word. Without raising your voice, institutions move aside. Papier-mâché regulations bend to avoid interfering with your trajectory, because the system instinctively recognizes that colliding with your osmium core means immediate disintegration. You win battles by occupying space, forcing enemies to suffocate. Kneeling entropy, the control of material time. The greatest conquest of the singularity is not over space, but over entropy. We have established that the sovereign does not experience psychological time. You have evaporated chronology in your anechoic chamber. But the 3D world is subject to entropy. Things rot, markets collapse, and bodies oxidize. In this final state, the monarch is not only immune to entropy, but he kneels it and uses it as his private demolition tool. The biomass fights against the wear of time. The sovereign monopolizes it. If you encounter a massive obstacle, an enemy corporation or a hostile government, you do not waste energy. You do not hammer at it. Being anchored in static eternity, you simply withdraw your friction, sit before your enemy's wall, and let entropy do the dirty work. You possess the capacity to not age psychologically. Your enemy does not. The adversary, scared by your immobility, will spend resources to stay up. They will burn money, health and alliances trying to protect themselves from your silent presence. Years will pass, and while you weigh exactly the same, intact and frigid, you will watch entropy rust the enemy's defenses into dust. The singularity defeats matter by refusing to rot alongside it. When the enemy structure finally collapses from material fatigue, you will stand up, walk over the rubble without having sweated a single drop, and claim the territory. Time is the executioner of the biomass, but it is the most loyal and ruthless servant of the Leviathan. You wait and the world erodes for you. The dictatorship of charged immobility. The empirical exercise of absolute power in this state requires no great speeches. It manifests through the dictatorship of charged immobility. Gaseous man believes action is the only form of dominance. If there is a problem, they run to fix it. If there is a vacuum, they run to fill it. They are frantic. The sovereign knows constant movement is a hemorrhage of gravity. In the state of singularity, the act of greatest violence you can exercise upon reality is the resolute, non-negotiable and brutal decision not to move. When a crisis explodes in your empire and everyone panics, you apply the state. You become a titanium statue in the center of the hurricane. Your refusal to react is a declaration of war against the crisis itself. You are telling the disaster, you do not have enough mass to alter my coordinates. This immobility generates a gravitational well, so intense the crisis itself must collapse. By not feeding it with your fear, you strip it of oxygen. By not running to solve it according to the enemy's terms, you force the problem to orbit you until it resolves itself, or until it weakens enough for you to annihilate it with a snap of your fingers. Governing by immobility is supreme contempt. The architect's coldness, absolute detachment from the work. As the state of singularity settles into your internal architecture, you will experience the final purge of biological emotion, absolute detachment from your own work. The weak creator falls in love with his creation. The businessman loves his company. The artist loves his art. The leader loves his herd. This love makes them vulnerable, because the universe now has hostages with which to extort them. The quantum monarch builds colossal empires of steel and capital, raising structures that defy the world's inertia. But he does so with the mathematical coldness of an architect, drawing a blueprint on a screen. You do not fall in love with the empire. You know the empire is just ash temporarily ordered by your barometric pressure. If tomorrow the tectonics of the universe decide to swallow your empire whole, the osmium core does not shed a single tear. You feel no loss, for you are the source of the work. The empire can be destroyed 1,000 times, and you can render it 1,001 times, because the source code resides intact in the inscrutable vacuum of your consciousness. This coldness makes you immortal. When the adversary realizes you will sacrifice the scenery without flinching, they lose. Final silence and the end of metaphysics. The state of singularity is not a place for spiritual revelations. Revelations are for students who still have doubts. In the center of the black hole, there are no doubts. There are no hidden truths to discover. There is only certainty, a certainty so dense, dark, and crushing it stifles philosophy. You have stopped thinking about power. You have stopped studying thermodynamics. By merging with charged immobility and putting on the osmium crown, you have become the anvil itself. The three-dimensional universe will cease to be a mystery. You will observe it as it is, a simple playground of particles. Everything is just elementary particles bouncing in the vacuum, desperately waiting for a greater force to dictate what geometry to adopt. You are that force. You will navigate the rest of your existence wrapped in a sepulchral silence, undetectable to the radars of mediocrity, executing martial law. You operate on your reality with the efficiency of a mathematical constant. There will be no more friction. There will be no more fatigue. Only the crushing, majestic, and indisputable weight of the Leviathan inhabiting the darkness of its own absolute creation. You are the beginning and the end of the code, the geometry of post-humanity. To exist within the singularity is to undergo a total divorce from the human condition. The biomass is defined by its needs. The need to be seen, the need to be loved, the need to be relevant. These are all high-pressure leaks. The sovereign has no needs. He has only requirements for the maintenance of his mass. In this stage, Your social interactions are no longer relationships. They are structural alignments. You do not talk to people. You interface with their density. You analyze their vectors. If their trajectory serves your expansion, you integrate them. If they generate friction, you eject them into the void. This is the biological zero point. You have stripped away the layers of mammalian sentimentality until only the crystalline structure of the Legislator remains. You move through a world of ghosts, realizing that most organisms are simply unrendered NPCs operating on loops of reactive fear and biological impulse. Your solitude is no longer a choice. It is a physical boundary. You cannot connect with those who inhabit the lower frequencies any more than a star can connect with a grain of dust. You simply exist, and your existence provides the light or the crushing shadow under which they must live their small lives. The command of the unseen hand. As a singularity, your most effective strikes are those that never appear on the board as attacks. Because you are the law, you can manipulate the environment so that the enemy's destruction appears as a natural disaster. You do not fire a gun, you simply adjust the atmospheric pressure until their lungs pop. This is the ghost command. You influence the logistics, the capital flows, and the social perceptions with such subtlety that the result seems inevitable. The victim does not blame you, they blame the market, the law, or fate. You remain invisible behind the event horizon of your own making. This level of mastery allows you to win wars that never officially started. You occupy the territory before the enemy realizes it was for sale. You own the debt before the debtor knows they are insolvent. By the time they look for a target to strike, you have already dissolved into the infrastructure of their reality. You are the ghost in the machine, the silent variable that ensures the equation always balances in your favor. Your power is no longer a weapon you carry. It is the ground upon which everyone else walks. To challenge you is to challenge the floor beneath their feet. It is a war they cannot even conceptualize, the eternal recurrence of the core. In the singularity, you realize that there is no end to the journey, only a deepening of the density. You have achieved the state, but the maintenance of that state requires eternal vigilance. The Osmium core is not a destination you reach and then relax. It is a permanent commitment to total responsibility. You become the guardian of the void. You ensure that no gas, no hope, and no external friction ever penetrates the chamber. You live in a state of permanent internal audit, refining your geometry until even the smallest fluctuation is smoothed out into a perfect dark surface of absolute certainty. This is the high sovereignty. You are the master of the void, the architect of the cold, and the keeper of the silence. You look back at the chapters of your life as if reading the history of a different species. The man who started this book is dead. The entity that finishes it is a force of nature. The board of ash is now still. The Leviathan has reached the bottom. The singularity is stable. There is nothing left to say, for words are the friction of those who still need to explain themselves. You do not explain. You do not justify. You simply exist, and the universe bends its knee to the weight of your presence, the sovereignty of the infinite dark. You have reached the final layer. The crown is no longer heavy, it is part of your skeleton. The isolation is no longer cold, it is your insulation. The responsibility is no longer a burden, it is your breath. You have transmutated from a seeker of power into the very substance of power itself. The world will continue to spin. The biomass will continue to scream and empires will continue to rot. But none of it touches you. You are the fixed point. You are the monarch of the singularity. You are the lead mask, the osmium core, and the final law. The work is done. The void is complete. Walk into the darkness of your own creation, with the eyes of a God who knows that the light was only a distraction. You are the master of the shadows, the king of the silence, and the eternal legislator of the ash. The universe is now a mirror of your own magnificent, terrifying, and absolute void. Conclusion: the end of diplomacy. The peace treaty with mediocrity has been formally revoked. You have reached the physical limit of theory. Searching for one more page, an additional piece of advice, or a new philosophy to soften the blow is an act of thermodynamic beggary. It is the last and pathetic attempt of your old biology to delay the inevitable. Diplomacy is the language of cowards. It is the art of diluting your own temperature, so as not to offend the cold of others. But you are no longer a gaseous organism negotiating its oxygen. You have become the most terrifying anomaly of the ecosystem, conscious matter operating in a state of singularity. The three-dimensional universe is not your friend, nor your teacher, nor your judge. It is an immense and stupid sheet of steel waiting passively for a superior mass to curve it. It does not negotiate with your hopes, nor is it moved by your tears. It only obeys barometric pressure, ballistic inertia, and heat transfer. Therefore, from this exact millisecond, negotiations with existence are over. No more asking permission to occupy space. No more trying to convince the biomass of your value. An osmium core does not ask the air for permission to fall. It simply pushes it aside with a silent and non-negotiable violence. Feel the weight that right now presses against your skull. That is the crown of absolute causality. Do not try to take it off. Do not try to delegate that weight to esoteric gods, to business partners, or to the global economy. Let the cold steel fuse with your spine. Assume that you are completely alone in the suffocating altitude of the summit, and understand that this solitude is not a punishment, but the mathematical confirmation of your endogenous sovereignty. You are the sole architect of your material empire and the sole gravedigger of your own excuses. Offer no justifications to those around you. When the biomass notices that you have stopped reacting to their stimuli and that you no longer participate in their collective hysterias, they will try to extort you. They will call you cold, arrogant, distant, and cruel. Receive those pathetic insults as war medals. Their thermal panic is the irrefutable proof that your gravitational well has begun to suffocate them. Turn your back on them, without uttering a word, and allow them to collapse under the unbearable weight of your charged immobility. This is the final decree. Close this document. Finish the dissection. If you continue consuming information without applying friction to your environment, you will become a useless scholar, a slave who memorized the laws of heavy physics, but never had the courage to sit on the throne. Rise from your seat. Direct your obsidian gaze toward the chaos of your reality, your finances, your conflicts, your territories, and apply absolute zero. Declare martial law over the cinder board. The time of diplomacy is dead. The entire universe waits in a sepulchral terror for the Leviathan to issue its first order.